The black housekeeper ignored him at first, until the Mafia boss showed his true nature. The butler's pantry was too small for what was happening inside it. White marble shelves pressed in on Celeste Monroe as she stood frozen, her back flat against the wall. Her black uniform was neat, her braided hair pulled tight, but nothing could hide the way her body trembled. A drunk Italian man in a tailored suit gripped her arm so hard his fingers burned. Fresh purple bruises swelled over older yellow marks. His other hand had just struck her face, leaving her cheek hot and numb. "You think you can pull away from me?" he muttered, breath thick with alcohol. Celeste didn't answer. She knew better. A voice interrupted him. Soft. Controlled. Calm. "Vincent." The grip loosened. A man stood in the doorway, coat dusted with snow, dark hair touched with gray. His expression was unreadable. His eyes were steady, cold, focused on the bruises climbing Celeste's arm. She recognized him immediately. The quiet man. The one she had ignored for weeks. The one she thought didn't matter. She was wrong. Very wrong. Because as the room fell silent, Celeste felt it clearly for the first time. Everything was about to change. But how did a woman like her become trapped in a powerful man's house? And who was the quiet stranger now watching her like this? Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow, we're bringing you another story you won't want to miss. Merry Christmas to all our amazing viewers around the world. We hope this season brings you peace, warmth, and moments that truly matter. Take time to share love with your friends and family, reach out to those you care about, and remind them how important they are. Thank you for being here with us. Your support means everything. Wishing you a joyful Christmas and a new year filled with hope and love. Let's begin. Celeste Monroe learned early that being noticed could get you hurt. At 32, she moved through the world with deliberate restraint. Her posture was straight but unassuming. Her steps were quiet, measured, careful not to draw attention. Her dark skin, smooth and unadorned, contrasted sharply with the polished surfaces she cleaned each day, yet she carried herself in a way that made people look past her rather than at her. Her braided hair was always pulled back neatly, her uniform pressed, her expression neutral. She gave nothing away. That was how she survived. 3 years working inside dangerous homes had taught her that visibility was a liability. The men she served did not want personalities. They wanted silence, efficiency, obedience. Celeste provided all three. She memorized schedules. She learned which doors to avoid and which corners of a room were safest to stand in. She listened without reacting and forgot what she heard as soon as it was spoken. The Caruso estate demanded that skill more than any place she had ever worked. The mansion sat on Astor Street in Chicago's Gold Coast, a stretch of wealth so extreme it felt detached from the rest of the city. From the front, it looked like old money and tradition. Stone walls, iron gates, tall windows facing Lake Michigan. Inside, everything gleamed. Italian marble floors reflected the glow of crystal chandeliers. Staircases curved like sculpted art. Each room was larger than Celeste's entire apartment in Bronzeville. The lake was visible from almost every window, gray and restless during winter. In December of 2019, the first signs of Christmas had begun to appear. Wreaths lined the corridors. Garland wrapped the banisters. A towering tree stood in the great room, not yet decorated, waiting for staff to finish polishing the ornaments locked away in storage. Yet no amount of decoration softened the atmosphere. Fear lived there. It shaped the way people spoke, the way they moved, the way they avoided eye contact. Even the air felt heavier inside those walls. Celeste felt it every morning when she stepped through the staff entrance and every night when she left, tension still tight in her shoulders. She hadn't chosen this job because she wanted to be there. She had chosen it because she had run out of choices. 2 years earlier, her mother's cancer diagnosis had collapsed Celeste's carefully balanced life. Treatments piled up faster than insurance would cover them. Bills arrived daily. Calls from collectors followed, relentless and unforgiving. Celeste took extra shifts, then second jobs, then third. None of it was enough. When she heard that Vincent Caruso paid his household staff 3 times the standard rate, she ignored the warning signs. Everyone in Chicago knew his name, even if they pretended not to. People didn't ask questions about men like him. They accepted the silence that surrounded them. Celeste needed the money. She told herself it would be temporary. A year at most. Pay down the debt. Protect her mother's care. Walk away. The first day, she noticed the rules without anyone explaining them. No one spoke unless spoken to. Staff avoided the main rooms unless summoned. When Vincent Caruso entered a space, conversations stopped. Eyes dropped. Bodies shifted aside to make room for him without being asked. Celeste followed suit. She never looked at him directly. Never addressed him unless necessary. Never lingered in a room longer than required. She cleaned, served, and vanished. Over time, she learned what not to notice. The men who arrived late at night with stiff movements and blood on their sleeves. The whispered conversations that fell silent when she entered. The heavy doors that led to the basement, always locked, always avoided. When sounds traveled upward from below, she focused harder on her work and kept moving. 6 months, she reminded herself each day. 6 months left until the debt was gone. But as winter set in, something began to shift. Vincent Caruso started looking at her. Not the way he looked at furniture or glassware, but the way a man looks at something he believes he owns. His eyes followed her longer than necessary. His attention lingered. His presence pressed closer when she passed. Celeste noticed everything. She always did. Vincent Caruso's attention did not arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, disguised as coincidence. He lingered in rooms longer when she was present. He found reasons to call her name when other staff were available. His eyes tracked her movements with a focus that made her skin tighten. At first, she told herself she was imagining it. Then came the touches. A brush of fingers against her wrist when she handed him his coffee. A hand placed too firmly on her shoulder as he passed. Moments brief enough to be denied, deliberate enough to be understood. Celeste adjusted her movements, keeping more distance, choosing longer routes through the house. It didn't help. By late November, he began calling her to his study. The room was always quiet, the door closed behind her. Vincent would sit behind his desk, watching her the way a man watches something he has already decided belongs to him. His gaze moved freely, unapologetic, sliding over her body while he asked meaningless questions about the household. She answered carefully, briefly, respectfully. The first time he grabbed her was in early December. She had been cleaning the formal dining room, standing on a step stool to reach the windows. She felt him before she saw him. His hand clamped around her upper arm, yanking her down hard enough to steal the air from her lungs. "You don't pull away from me," he said, low and close, his grip crushing. "You work here. You belong here." She froze. When he released her, he straightened his suit and walked out as if nothing had occurred. Celeste stood alone, staring at the marks already forming on her skin. Purple rising fast. Angry. Unmistakable. That night, she sat on the edge of her bed in her Bronzeville apartment, her coat still on, her work bag untouched by the door. She studied the bruise under the bathroom light, turning her arm slowly. Celeste noticed everything. She always did. Vincent Caruso's attention did not arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, disguised as coincidence. He lingered in rooms longer when she was present. He found reasons to call her name when other staff were available. His eyes tracked her movements with a focus that made her skin tighten. At first, she told herself she was imagining it. Then came the touches. A brush of fingers against her wrist when she handed him his coffee. A hand placed too firmly on her shoulder as he passed. Moments brief enough to be denied, deliberate enough to be understood. Celeste adjusted her movements, keeping more distance, choosing longer routes through the house. It didn't help. By late November, he began calling her to his study. The room was always quiet, the door closed behind her. Vincent would sit behind his desk, watching her the way a man watches something he has already decided belongs to him. His gaze moved freely, unapologetic, sliding over her body while he asked meaningless questions about the household. She answered carefully, briefly, respectfully. The first time he grabbed her was in early December. She had been cleaning the formal dining room, standing on a step stool to reach the windows. She felt him before she saw him. His hand clamped around her upper arm, yanking her down hard enough to steal the air from her lungs. "You don't pull away from me," he said, low and close, his grip crushing. "You work here. You belong here." She froze. When he released her, he straightened his suit and walked out as if nothing had occurred. Celeste stood alone, staring at the marks already forming on her skin. Purple rising fast. Angry. Unmistakable. That night, she sat on the edge of her bed in her Bronzeville apartment, her coat still on, her work bag untouched by the door. She studied the bruise under the bathroom light, turning her arm slowly. Lorenzo Vittori became a regular presence after that night. He arrived without announcement, his car pulling up the drive at varying hours. Sometimes he came alone. Sometimes with men who waited outside. Each visit ended with Vincent Caruso looking unsettled in a way Celeste had never seen before. Meetings took place behind closed doors. When they ended, Vincent's voice carried sharp edges as he barked orders at staff. Glasses shattered more often. Doors slammed harder. Celeste learned to stay out of his path on those days, pressing herself against walls or slipping through service corridors when she sensed his approach. Lorenzo noticed all of it. During dinners, he sat quietly at the long table while others talked over one another. He ate little. He drank slowly. His attention drifted often toward doorways, tracking who entered and who left. When Celeste appeared to clear plates or refill glasses, his eyes lifted briefly, then lowered again. He never stared. He never spoke to her beyond a soft greeting when their paths crossed. "Good evening." "Thank you." Always calm. Always controlled. Celeste responded with brief nods, careful to keep distance between them. She stepped aside when he passed. She kept her eyes lowered when serving him. In her mind, he remained what she believed him to be, another dangerous man who happened to be quieter than the rest. Quiet did not mean safe. She had learned that lesson long before this house. What Celeste did not know was that Lorenzo had already learned her patterns. The way she moved clockwise through rooms. The moments she paused near windows to steady her breathing. The way her shoulders stiffened when Vincent entered a space. He had seen her flinch once. It had been small. Nearly invisible. Vincent leaned in to speak near her ear, and Celeste's body reacted before her face did. Lorenzo caught it instantly. The tightening. The hesitation. The quick recovery. His fingers tightened around his glass. To the men in the room, Lorenzo Vittori was simply another figure of influence. Well-dressed. Reserved. Respectful in his dealings. None of them spoke his name casually. They did not need to. He was known by another title. Il Silenzio. His reach extended far beyond this house. From Chicago down through St. Louis and into New Orleans, his word carried weight. His operations were clean, precise, built on control rather than noise. When problems vanished under his watch, questions were not asked. Vincent Caruso knew this. That knowledge sat heavy on him now. As the week progressed, Lorenzo's visits continued. Each one chipped away at Vincent's confidence. Each one sharpened Lorenzo's focus. He noticed the second discoloration near Celeste's arm. The way she favored one side when carrying trays. The careful way she avoided Vincent's direct line of sight. Celeste noticed none of it. She remained committed to disappearing. She counted days. She counted payments. She kept her head down and told herself she was almost free. She did not know that Lorenzo Vittori had first seen her 6 months earlier in a grocery store on Roosevelt Road. She did not know he had followed her from a distance that day, that he had learned her name, her address, her routine. She did not know he had discovered the debt tying her to Vincent Caruso, or that he had been waiting patiently. Lorenzo had always been careful with his attention. He did not rush decisions. He did not move without certainty. Patience had built everything he controlled. It allowed him to wait while others exposed themselves through greed or carelessness. Celeste Monroe tested that patience in ways he had not anticipated. From the moment he followed her out of the grocery store 6 months earlier, he had been alert to the pull she created. Not beauty alone. There was something in the way she moved through space as if trying to leave no mark behind. Something restrained. Something trained. He had watched her load groceries into her car. Watched her pause before driving away, eyes scanning the street as if expecting trouble. He had memorized the license plate. The building where she lived. The hours she came and went. Learning about the debt had changed everything. Vincent Caruso had acquired her the way he acquired everything else, through leverage. Medical bills. Late payments. Pressure applied until resistance gave way. Lorenzo had recognized the danger immediately. Still, he waited. He needed to understand the house before he touched anything inside it. He needed to confirm patterns, habits, weaknesses. He needed proof, not suspicion. The bruises confirmed it. Not all at once. First a mark near her wrist. Then the shadowed discoloration along her arm. Subtle enough to miss. Obvious enough to someone who knew where to look. Lorenzo watched her serve guests one evening, her movements flawless despite the tension in her shoulders. Vincent spoke to her sharply when a glass was placed too close to the edge of the table. She corrected it without protest, eyes down, breath held. That moment settled something in him. This was not chaos. This was ownership. He did not confront Vincent. He did not warn Celeste. He did not change his routine. Intervention required timing, precision. Mistakes here would cost lives. Instead, he applied pressure elsewhere. Deals shifted. Routes were questioned. Meetings ended with Vincent conceding ground he had once guarded fiercely. Each visit from Lorenzo left the house tighter, quieter. Celeste felt the change without understanding it. Vincent's moods worsened. His temper shortened. His attention sharpened toward her in ways that made her stomach knot. She counted days faster now. She had no idea that the man she barely acknowledged had already decided something irreversible. That her debt, her fear, her endurance had been measured and weighed. Lorenzo Vittori did not act on impulse. When he moved, it would be final. December 23rd arrived under a sky heavy with snow, the kind that muted sound and made Chicago feel sealed off from the rest of the world. By the time dawn crept over Lake Michigan, the Caruso estate was already awake. Celeste had been on her feet since before 6. Silverware lined the long dining table in exact formation, each piece polished until it reflected the chandelier lights overhead. White roses and pine branches filled crystal vases, their sharp scent clinging to her hands no matter how many times she washed them. Garlands were secured along the staircase railings, ornaments adjusted until they faced forward, never crooked, never careless. Vincent noticed everything. He moved through the house with short, irritated steps, his voice sharp even when he wasn't shouting. Staff members kept their distance. A maid dropped a tray in the hall and flinched as if struck. Vincent didn't yell at her. He didn't need to. The look on his face did enough. His mood had been declining all week. The meetings with Lorenzo Vittori unsettled him in ways he didn't bother hiding. He drank earlier each day. He paced his study late into the night. He snapped at Celeste over nothing, correcting her posture, her timing, the way she folded napkins she had folded the same way for 3 years. His eyes lingered now. Openly. When she passed him in the corridor, his hand brushed her hip and stayed there a second too long. When she bent to adjust the tree skirt in the great room, his gaze tracked her without shame. He began calling her to his study more often, inventing small tasks that required her presence alone. The night before, he stopped pretending. He had cornered her against the bookshelf, the leather spines pressing into her back. One hand rested on her thigh, heavy, claiming. His breath smelled of whiskey and impatience. "Tomorrow night," he had whispered. "After the party. You and I are going to have a private celebration." She didn't answer. She didn't move. Survival had taught her when silence was safer than refusal. That night, she barely slept. In her Bronzeville apartment, she lay on her back and stared at the ceiling until it blurred. She counted breaths. Counted heartbeats. Considered options she already knew were impossible. Leaving meant being followed. Speaking meant not being believed. Fighting meant not walking away. 6 months, she reminded herself. The debt was almost gone. Her mother's treatments were nearly paid off. Freedom was close enough to taste if she didn't make a mistake now. She arrived at the estate just after 7, her expression composed, her uniform pressed. No one would know she hadn't slept. No one ever did. Vincent found her in the hallway near the butler's pantry just before noon. He was already drunk, already restless. His fingers closed around her arm as if testing how much pressure he could apply. "Busy day," he said quietly. "You'll be staying late." She nodded. That was all she allowed herself. As she stepped into the pantry to retrieve a tray, she felt the air shift behind her. The door closed. The lock clicked. Her pulse stuttered. The butler's pantry was narrow, designed for efficiency, not comfort. Shelves of china and serving trays boxed her in on both sides. The marble floor felt colder than the rest of the house, even through her shoes. Vincent stood between her and the door. "You think I don't notice?" he said, his voice low and uneven. "The way you avoid me. The way you rush off." She kept her eyes on the shelf behind him, on a chipped saucer she meant to replace later. Her silence seemed to irritate him more than words ever could. His hand tightened around her arm. Pain shot through her shoulder, sharp enough to steal her breath. She gasped before she could stop herself, and his grip increased in response, fingers digging into the same spot he had grabbed days earlier. She felt the bruise beneath her skin flare to life. "I've been patient," he said. "Longer than most men would be." She tried to step back. There was nowhere to go. His free hand came up fast. The sound of it striking her face echoed off the marble walls, loud and clean. Her head snapped to the side, vision flashing white. She tasted blood and metal. "I've waited long enough," he said. The world narrowed to sensation. The shelf pressing into her spine. The heat of his hand. The throb in her cheek. Her heart pounding hard enough to make her lightheaded. She opened her mouth to speak. To beg. To say anything that might slow him down. A voice interrupted them. "Vincent." It wasn't loud. It wasn't sharp. It was calm enough to feel out of place. Vincent froze. Celeste lifted her eyes for the first time and saw a man standing in the doorway. Snow clung to the shoulders of his dark coat, melting slowly onto the polished floor. His hair was dark, threaded with gray at the temples. His face was composed, almost relaxed. His eyes were not. They were fixed on Vincent, steady and unreadable. Vincent released her arm but did not step away. He turned, forcing a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Lorenzo," he said, too quickly. "Didn't hear you come in." Lorenzo didn't answer him. He looked at Celeste. Not past her. Not through her. At her. She felt it immediately, the shift in attention, the way the room seemed to center on that quiet focus. His gaze moved from her face to her arm, where Vincent's fingers had left fresh marks over old ones. Vincent followed the direction of that look and laughed softly. "She startled me," he said. "Clumsy thing." Lorenzo stepped fully into the pantry, closing the distance without haste. He stopped beside Celeste, not close enough to touch her, but near enough that she felt his presence like a barrier. "This bruise," he said calmly. "It wasn't here yesterday." Vincent's smile tightened. Lorenzo's eyes lifted, meeting Celeste's. There was no softness there, no comfort offered. Only certainty. "What happened to you?" Her throat closed. She had practiced lies for years, had survived on them, but none came now. The truth pressed too close to the surface. Before she could speak, Lorenzo turned his head slightly. "Leave us," he said. His voice did not rise. It didn't need to. Vincent hesitated. For a moment, it looked as though he might argue. Then his gaze dropped. He stepped back, opened the door, and walked out without another word. The lock clicked again. Celeste and Lorenzo were alone. The silence lingered after Vincent's departure, broken only by the faint ticking of a clock on the wall. Celeste's chest heaved, each breath shallow and rapid. Her fingers trembled as they rested on the edge of the shelf. Lorenzo finally shifted closer. Not aggressively, not with haste, but deliberately, with a control that demanded attention. He reached for her arm, carefully, almost reverently. Celeste flinched at first, the memory of Vincent's grip too fresh, but his touch was nothing like the other man's. Gentle, examining, aware. "Months," he murmured, his voice low. "This has been going on for months?" She swallowed hard, unable to meet his eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Getting worse." His thumb traced the edges of the bruises, lingering over each mark. There was no pity, no soft-hearted lament. Only awareness. Anger. A quiet, controlled force that seemed to hum beneath his calm exterior. "You should never have had to endure this," he said, his tone deceptively calm. "No one should." Celeste's lips parted, but no words came. She felt a strange mixture of fear and relief. Fear for the man who could be capable of much, and relief that he was not Vincent. Lorenzo straightened, giving her space, but never letting his eyes leave her. "He will never touch you again. Do you understand me, Celeste? Never again." Her mind tried to process what that meant. "You don't even know me," she whispered. He gave a faint, controlled smile. "I know enough. I know where you go every Sunday, whom you care for, the little things that make you you. I've been patient." The calm in his demeanor was almost alarming. He seemed poised to dismantle the world around him to ensure her safety without raising a single voice. Celeste's heartbeat slowed slightly. The fear she had carried for weeks, months, began to shift into something foreign, hope. He lowered his gaze to hers. "You were dismissed by everyone else, overlooked. Not by me. You've been seen, Celeste, truly seen. That doesn't happen often." The sound of the distant party preparations faded. The muffled laughter, the clinking glasses, none of it mattered anymore. In the small pantry, between the polished shelves and the cold marble floor, something fundamental had shifted. Celeste realized that the rules she had lived by, the walls she had built to survive, no longer applied. Someone who held real power had recognized her humanity. Someone she had dismissed entirely had made a choice to intervene. Not for display, not for recognition, but because he had decided her suffering ended now. A small tremor of relief ran through her as Lorenzo's words lingered. "You are safe, and you will remain safe." For the first time in months, Celeste allowed herself to breathe fully. The weight she had carried, the fear, the bruises, the silence, had a crack. And in that crack, she glimpsed a possibility she had long denied, freedom, not just from Vincent, but from the invisible life she had been forced to lead. The pantry was still, the clatter from the upstairs preparations muted by heavy doors and thick walls. Celeste leaned against the marble counter, her fingers tracing the grooves of the shelves for support. Her breathing had slowed since Vincent's abrupt departure, but her body still hummed with tension. Lorenzo stepped closer, each movement measured, careful, almost reverent. He did not reach for her immediately. Instead, he paused, letting her take in his presence. "May I?" he asked softly, gesturing toward her arm. His voice carried no judgment, no hurry, only a quiet authority that compelled her to respond. Celeste hesitated. Trust had been eroded over months of watching hands close too tightly, seeing eyes linger too long. Finally, she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. His hands moved slowly, deliberately, brushing over the bruises that had started fading into yellow but remained vivid under her skin. His touch was gentle enough to make her flinch less, to soften her guarded stance. He traced each mark with a tenderness that made her blink back tears she hadn't realized she was holding. "How long?" he asked, his gray eyes searching hers. "Months," she admitted, her voice almost inaudible. "Getting worse." There was no surprise in his expression, only an intensity that made the room feel smaller, the air thicker. Lorenzo's jaw tightened, his gaze unwavering. "He will never touch you again. Do you understand me, Celeste? Never again." The words were low, controlled, but they carried a weight that settled over her like armor. Celeste swallowed hard, confused by the sense of safety this stranger, this man she barely acknowledged days ago, was instilling. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "You don't even know me." He paused, as if weighing how much to reveal, then spoke with calm certainty. "I know enough. I know where you go every Sunday. I know the places you care for quietly, the small ways you show kindness. I know the tears you hide during movies that no one else sees." The depth of his knowledge unsettled her, yet it was paired with a protection she hadn't felt in years. Her chest tightened as realization settled in. Someone had seen her fully when the world treated her like invisible air. Lorenzo stepped back slightly, still watching her, still in control of the room without a single harsh movement. His expression softened, though the intensity behind it remained. "You were overlooked. Not by me. You've been seen, Celeste. Truly seen." Her fingers tightened around the edge of the counter, the tension in her body shifting. Not from fear, but from something foreign, almost startling, hope. Lorenzo's eyes never left hers as he spoke again, a quiet intensity threading each word. "The moment I saw you, I knew you were meant to be mine. I have been patient, careful, planning every step. Your life, your suffering. It accelerated my timeline, but not my intent." Celeste's lips parted, searching for words that wouldn't come. The weight of his certainty pressed into her chest, the power behind his calm voice unsettling yet impossible to ignore. "You've watched over me?" she whispered, disbelief lacing each syllable. "I've observed. I've known." He took a slow step closer, his presence overwhelming the small space of the pantry. "Every threat, every look of possession, every moment you were forced to endure, I've catalogued it all. I know Vincent has tested your limits. Soon, he won't be able to touch you at all." Her pulse quickened, the idea both thrilling and terrifying. "What are you going to do?" His breath was near her ear, low and steady. "What I do best, Bellissima. I will be silent, patient. And then Vincent Caruso will disappear from your life. Permanently." A shiver ran down her spine, but it wasn't fear. The danger she had grown accustomed to no longer felt insurmountable. The uncertainty that had defined her days, the constant vigilance, shifted into a fragile but real sense of safety. Celeste's mind raced. For years she had learned to make herself invisible, to survive unseen. And yet here was someone who saw her completely. Not only her movements, her face, or her role within these walls, but her choices, her routines, the very essence of her existence. "Why me?" she murmured. Lorenzo's gaze softened, though the power behind it remained palpable. "Because you are not like the others. You endure, you care, you resist quietly. That resilience drew me. That strength compelled me to act before anyone else could notice." A strange warmth spread through Celeste, a realization settling over her with undeniable clarity. She had been invisible for years, walking through spaces filled with judgment, cruelty, and disregard. And now, someone recognized her fully. The man who had seemed unremarkable was anything but. Her fear, though still present, mingled with trust she had thought impossible. The oppressive weight of her situation, the looming presence of Vincent, the tension that had governed her every move, dissolved enough for her to breathe freely, if only for a moment. She straightened, the small tremor in her hands fading. In this quiet, hidden pantry, with snow falling beyond the estate walls, Celeste Monroe understood for the first time that being truly seen did not always lead to harm. Sometimes it led to protection, and to something far more profound, hope. The Caruso estate glittered under a web of lights that stretched from the front gates to the mansion's roof. Every tree and balcony was lined with white bulbs, and the courtyard fountains were encased in delicate ice that caught the glow of lanterns. Inside, the great room hummed with conversation. 12 musicians filled the space with smooth strings and a subtle piano, and the smell of rich food mingled with the faint scent of pine. Guests arrived in tailored suits and gowns, the city's criminal elite moving with a quiet confidence, their laughter masking the unspoken calculations that threaded each conversation. Celeste moved through the rooms as she always did, hands steady, eyes alert, a shadow among the crowd. She adjusted trays of hors d'oeuvres, straightened glasses, and kept her movements efficient. Her awareness was heightened, not just for the bustling party, but for Lorenzo. Near the massive Christmas tree, he stood apart, his presence understated but impossible to ignore. She had dismissed him at first, and now, even in a crowded room, she felt the weight of his gaze, and a cautious sense of safety. Vincent, at the bar with a drink that had already dulled his wit, watched her with sharp intensity. The familiar tension settled around her shoulders, the invisible thread of fear she had carried for months. She told herself to keep moving, to remain unseen, and her pulse matched the quiet rhythm of the orchestra. At 10 o'clock, Lorenzo approached Vincent. He leaned in, speaking softly, his voice meant for Vincent's ears alone. The reactions were subtle but swift. Confusion flickered across Vincent's face, followed by anger, then a tightening panic that he could not hide. He excused himself 30 minutes later, claiming urgent business, and followed Lorenzo toward his study. Celeste caught her breath, noting every movement, every change in the energy around them. An hour passed. At 11, Lorenzo emerged alone. He crossed the room with quiet authority, catching Celeste's eye across the crowd. A subtle nod, almost imperceptible, acknowledged her without drawing attention. Then he left the mansion, stepping into the crisp Chicago night. Snow had begun to settle on the estate grounds, softening the world outside while the house inside hummed with normality, unaware of the shift that had just occurred. By midnight, the discovery was undeniable. Vincent's study was empty. His car remained in the garage, untouched. His phone lay abandoned on the desk. Vincent Caruso had vanished, leaving no trace behind. The empire he had built with ruthlessness and intimidation began to fracture almost immediately. Even as police launched their investigation, the truth remained elusive. Weeks became months, and Vincent was declared missing, presumed dead, the power he wielded dissolved without a single confrontation. Celeste felt the air in the room change, a weight she had carried for months lifting just enough for her to breathe. For the first time, she could move freely, her survival instincts no longer tethered to fear of immediate danger. The room of Chicago's elite remained unaware that their carefully constructed world had shifted irreversibly, all because of a quiet man who had acted in silence, and the woman he had chosen to protect. The party carried on with the usual blend of charm and tension, laughter and quiet calculation moving through the room. Celeste glided along the periphery, her presence measured, careful, attending to the estate's needs while remaining unseen by all but the observant. Her eyes, trained to read rooms for danger, constantly flicked toward Lorenzo near the massive Christmas tree. His figure was calm, poised, yet every subtle motion suggested readiness. Vincent, swaying slightly from too much whiskey, tried to maintain control of the room. His gaze tracked Celeste as she moved, sharp and possessive. The tension between them was almost tangible. At precisely 10 p.m., Lorenzo approached Vincent, leaning in close so only he could hear the words spoken softly. Vincent's expression shifted rapidly, confusion, irritation, then something bordering on fear. By 10:30, Vincent excused himself from the crowd, claiming urgent business, and disappeared into his study with Lorenzo close behind. The murmurs of the party continued outside, oblivious to the shift in the household's balance of power. Celeste, finishing a last round of checks near the grand hall, caught Lorenzo's eye. There was a subtle nod, imperceptible to anyone else, a signal that the outcome had already been set into motion. Minutes stretched with deliberate tension until 11 p.m. Lorenzo emerged alone from the study, composed as ever, the shadow of authority clinging to his presence. Celeste felt a strange mix of relief and awe. The man who had entered her life quietly weeks ago had executed something decisive without a word to anyone else. As midnight approached, the final confirmation came. Vincent's study, once the center of his empire within the mansion, stood empty. His car remained in the garage, his phone on the desk untouched. There would be no trace, no explanation left for anyone to follow. Vincent Caruso, one of the most feared men in Chicago, had simply vanished. The empire he had built, the threats he had leveraged, all crumbled in the silence left behind. Celeste allowed herself a moment to breathe, standing by the frozen windows and watching the first flakes of a fresh snowfall drift lazily past. In that stillness, she felt the sharp edge of fear dissolve into something unfamiliar, relief, and the faint pulse of hope. For the first time in years, the weight of constant vigilance and danger lifted from her shoulders. The crowd in the great room, unaware of the unseen chess moves that had concluded, continued their celebrations, oblivious to the absence of the man who had once held such power over the household. Outside, the city's lights reflected off the snow, indifferent to the quiet shift that had occurred in the Gold Coast mansion. Inside, Celeste understood she was no longer a shadow in someone else's life. She was on the threshold of something wholly her own, under the careful watch of a man who saw her completely. Snow blanketed the Lake Geneva estate, softening the edges of the world outside. The house, smaller than the Caruso mansion, radiated warmth. Steam curled from a coffee pot in the kitchen, and the fire in the stone hearth cast a golden glow across the living room. Every surface suggested comfort rather than opulence, intimacy rather than intimidation. Celeste stood at the window, a silk robe draped over her shoulders, watching the first rays of sunlight stretch across the frozen lake. She inhaled deeply, the crisp air carrying a quiet sense of possibility. A presence behind her drew a shiver of anticipation. Lorenzo's arms circled her waist, and she felt the reassuring strength of him there. "Merry Christmas, Bellissima," he murmured, his voice low, steady, familiar. Celeste pressed her hands over his, the warmth grounding her in a way she hadn't experienced before. "I thought I dismissed you completely," she admitted, her voice hesitant. "I didn't think you were remarkable at all." Lorenzo's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "I was counting on it," he replied. "The best predators don't look like predators. They appear soft, quiet, and unassuming. By the time anyone realizes the truth, it's far too late." She leaned back into him, feeling the reality of her new life. She should feel fear, a flicker of the old caution she carried in Chicago. Instead, she felt an unusual sense of peace. Here, she was no longer invisible. Here, she was seen, valued, protected. Lorenzo's hands remained steady on her waist as she turned slightly, meeting his gaze. The depth in his gray eyes held a quiet intensity that made her heartbeat accelerate. "I should be afraid," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the soft crackle of the fire. "I should question the darkness I'm embracing." He pressed a gentle kiss to her temple. "There is no darkness here for you, not with me. You've carried enough of it alone." His words sank into her, a balm to years of tension and vigilance. Celeste closed her eyes, letting herself feel the truth in that moment. She was no longer just the careful, invisible woman who had survived by fading into the shadows. She was someone cherished, someone entirely seen. Lorenzo leaned closer, brushing his lips to hers in a slow, deliberate kiss. The world outside ceased to exist, leaving only the warmth of their connection. He lifted her gently, and as he carried her toward the bedroom, the weight of past fear fell away, replaced by an unwavering sense of safety. For the first time in years, Celeste understood that she had shifted from surviving to thriving, from invisible victim to protected, from dismissed to completely acknowledged. Every careful step she had taken to navigate danger had led her here, to this quiet morning in a place that promised more than safety, it promised belonging. As Lorenzo whispered soft assurances and promises that required no explanation, Celeste let herself melt into the life he offered. A life born from restraint, patience, and a vision that had always been beyond her own. 2 years had passed, and the Vittoria estate in Lake Geneva held a Christmas gathering unlike any Celeste had known before. The snow lay thick over the lake, turning the world into a quiet white expanse. Children from local community centers ran through the yard, their laughter carrying over the frozen grounds. Families sipped hot chocolate and nibbled cookies, the scent of cinnamon and pine filling the house. Celeste moved among the guests with ease, her presence calm yet quietly commanding. She oversaw the event not from a position of control, but from a place of care. Her contributions to literacy programs, funded discreetly, attended personally, were not publicized, but today she saw the direct joy of the children whose lives she had touched. Across the room, Lorenzo's gray eyes followed her, soft with an unexpected happiness. The man who had once moved through life with calculated precision now allowed himself small moments of delight. He reflected on the transformation, who he had been 2 years ago, and who he had become. There was strength in his restraint, and warmth in the life they had built together. When their eyes met, Celeste noticed the weight in his gaze. She teased lightly, "Always observing, aren't you?" He smiled faintly, correcting her. "Observing. Always you." His voice carried a quiet certainty, a promise. "You are my obsession, my addiction, my reason for breathing." Celeste felt the truth in the words, the depth of the devotion that had been patient and unwavering. Their private moment drew them away from the noise and warmth of the party. Lorenzo reached for her hand, holding it with the same careful attention he had shown the first time he had approached her bruised arm. Celeste leaned into him, her head resting against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his gray eyes locking with hers. "Merry Christmas, Bellissima," he whispered, his lips barely grazing her ear. Her heart quickened, but fear no longer shadowed her. Instead, she felt an unspoken safety, the kind that came from being fully seen and fully known. Their lips met, tentative at first, then with the quiet certainty of two people who had survived storms together. In that kiss was a lifetime of protection, of obsession refined into devotion, of darkness transformed into trust. The world beyond the lake, beyond the snow, and beyond past traumas ceased to exist. Outside, the first snowfall of the morning continued, covering Lake Geneva in pristine white. Laughter and music floated through the air, the estate alive with the joy that came from lives rebuilt. Celeste recognized the transformation complete. Invisible no longer, she had moved from victim to cherished, from prey to protected, from overlooked to seen in every possible way. The lesson was clear. Sometimes salvation comes from the places we least expect, from those who watch silently, waiting for the right moment to act. Celeste's story was proof that resilience and trust could carve a life of meaning from shadows, and that love, when patient and vigilant, could be powerful enough to transform everything. This story shows the truths of human nature and survival. Appearances can be deceiving. The loud, aggressive, and demanding often draw attention, but true power sometimes rests with those who observe silently. We dismiss the quiet, assuming insignificance, unaware that depth and influence can lie beneath calm exteriors. Victims of abuse are often trapped by forces beyond their control. Financial burdens, limited opportunities, and fear of retaliation shape decisions and restrict escape. Judgment has no place here. Understanding the complex pressures that hold someone in a dangerous situation is far more important. Celeste's endurance was not weakness, it was strategy, a survival instinct honed over years. Salvation does not always announce itself. Celeste had overlooked Lorenzo, seeing only a quiet man. Yet he saw her completely, noticing details and truths invisible to everyone else. Sometimes the person who alters the course of our lives remains hidden in plain sight, waiting with patience and precision. Ultimately, Celeste reclaimed herself. Her visibility, her agency, and her right to be valued were restored not despite surrounding darkness but through it. Strength often comes from navigating shadowed paths and finding the light within. The story reminds us that rescue and transformation can take unexpected forms. It may arrive quietly, subtly, and without warning, but when it does, it can change everything. If this story touched you, let us know in the comments below. Share where you're watching from and which part of Celeste's journey resonated most. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss another story. Your support, through likes, comments, and shares, helps us continue bringing powerful tales like this to life. From all of us here, Merry Christmas. We hope your holiday season is filled with warmth, joy, and moments that remind you of the power of connection and hope. Thank you for joining us on this story, and stay tuned. Tomorrow we'll bring another tale that will hold your attention and stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Happy holidays, and may your days be safe, bright, and full of stories worth sharing.